All right, here we go with day 14, I think, of Habibi by Shihab, Naomi Shihab Nye. So here we go. It's a little bit later this evening. You caught me sitting in my favorite chair. Yes, this is where I love to sit. And hopefully I don't have to put my reading glasses on because it causes a glare for you. But oh well. All right, so here we go. Starting off with goat cheese, and that is on page 200. And the author says, for the quote at the top, drop in any time and stay forever. Poppy said their skins would feel so sticky after plunging into the Dead Sea, they'd have to lie down under freshwater spigots to wash off. He drove Leanna, Rafik, Khaled, and Nadine on the descending road through sand dunes toward Jericho because Rafik had been bugging him so much. Mrs. Aboud had gone on a weekend retreat with her women's group. The women were going to hike 10 miles through the wilderness to see some nuns who wouldn't be hermits anymore once they got there. Leanna and Rafik had bathing suits on under their clothes, bottled water, towels, and a blanket. I would take a blanket. They had a basket of small bananas. Leanna hadn't worn her baggy old man shorts after all. She'd decided to make them into a purse. Khaled and Nadine said they would go swimming in their clothes. They brought extra clothes rolled up and tied with a string. Sunlight vibrated on the golden sand. Grateful dunes cast shadows on one another. There weren't any clouds. It felt wonderful to leave the clutter of town behind. Around a curve, Rafik shouted, "Stop!" Poppy hated when someone yelled in a car. He braked sharply and pulled over. The roads didn't have shoulders like they did back home. "Don't scare me. What is it?" Rafik pointed. "I want to visit them." Poppy and Leanna in the front seat hadn't even noticed the Bedouin tents perched far from the road in a crevice of shade between two dunes. They'd been talking about City's new obsession for black sweaters. Though they had brought her 2 already, she still wanted one with pockets. "You said we could visit the Bedouins," Rafik's voice from the back seat was insistent. He didn't beg very often. "Please!" Khaled and Nadine jabbered in Arabic to each other. Poppy looked at his watch. "If we visit them, we might not make it to the Dead Sea. They'll keep us all day." "We'll just run away," Poppy said. "Khaled, what do you say?" Khaled's voice was gentle. He never wanted to boss anyone around. "I say yes." The minute Leanna's eyes focused on the flapping black tents, she noticed a small camel staked beside them, the first she'd seen in this country since they'd arrived. Poppy always included camels in his childhood stories and folk tales, but they'd mostly vanished from this land since then. Where had they gone? Had they all trekked away to Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi? She'd been wishing so hard to see one. Leanna pitched in. "Yes, let's visit them for just a minute. Come on, Poppy." Nadine was laughing. Poppy groaned. "A Bedouin's minute is an hour to you, maybe 2 or 3. Believe me." But he pulled the car farther off the road, and he said, "What if we get stuck in a sand dune? What if the sand shifts while we're visiting and swallows the car entirely?" But his children were relentless. Poppy said Bodouins, I'm not sure how to say that, like their camels, were much fewer and farther apart than they used to be, but still as friendly. "I thought they were fierce," Rafik said. Poppy said they are, but not to their guests. The 5 of them hiked in towards the tents. Halfway there, Poppy returned to the car to get the basket of bananas. "You always bring a gift to Badoons," he said, "like a house gift to people without a house." The women of the tribe were off beyond the tents, shaking dust from little rugs. Children in baggy clothes played a game involving sticks, balls, and large tin cans. Tall men with lean faces sat before the largest tent wearing black cloaks and headdresses, stitching tarps together with huge needles. Maybe they were making a new tent, Leanna thought. The camel shifted its feet as they approached. It watched them closely. Spectacular white cheeses lay lined like 30 perfect moons on a dark cloth, drying in the sun. Nadine pointed at them and babbled excitedly to Khaled, and she said in English, "So much!" All the men rose up as they approached. Poppy talked fast and heartily, so that before they knew it, they were sitting in a circle with the Bodines. Everyone was laughing and nodding and asking questions about America, and the women were serving tea and slices of cheese in front of Rafik. He looked worried. He hated white cheese. Leanna grinned. Poppy translated, "They're ready to adopt you. See, I told you. Get set for a long day." He also said, "I told them we are Arab Americans, and they're shocked. They didn't know such people existed. We're the first visitors who have come by in a long time. In the old days, people used to stop in more. Bodines didn't even wander as much as they used to. Nowadays, they change places only once a year instead of every few months." I can't see it. In Saudi Arabia, the Bodines have all been settled in towns. It's a shame. It was such a great tradition. Rafik's eyes were huge. Did the women think he was going to eat the whole cheese? Why were they focusing on him instead of Khaled? Maybe they liked his red and blue striped t-shirt. Nadine took 4 pieces of cheese, which helped him out. "How do Bodines live?" Leanna asked Poppy. "I mean, where do they get their money?" "Money? Do you see any money?" "The goats are in a patch of grass over the dunes somewhere. The people sleep right here. They eat right here. Their lives are extremely simple." Now Leanna knew she wanted to be a Bodine when she grew up. A woman with kind eyes produced 2 goatskin drums. Even though Poppy said Bodine music usually happened after sundown, 2 young men began slapping quick rhythms and singing for them the same words and notes repeated over and over. Leanna clapped her hands and hummed along. They liked that. Nadine snapped her fingers. A girl with tight braids swayed and bent hypnotically. Khaled accepted a drum and began playing with one swift, accurate hand. Rafik leaned backward on his tarp as far from the cheese as he could. He nodded bravely when the women pointed at it again. They sat within the graceful slopes of dunes, tucked away from the road and the few cars and jeeps going by. Leanna felt her thoughts drifting into the sky. Her eyelids drooped. Was this music putting her into a trance? She wished her friends from back home could be here. This was what they would call an exotic moment. She wished her mother were here too. Hermit women couldn't be more interesting than this. After the 99th verse of the song, Poppy stood up. The Bodines protested. "Please," they said to him in Arabic. "You must spend the night." Poppy laughed. He promised they'd be back. What could they bring them from the city? The Bodines wanted Rafik to take a cheese home with him, a new cheese, not even the strong one they had all nibbled from. Poppy left the bananas and the basket both. The Bodines liked the basket. They kept touching it admiringly. It was her mother's favorite basket. Leanna wondered, would she be upset? Walking back to the car with the entire Bodine tribe sadly watching them leave, Poppy said to Rafik, "Oh no, you didn't even ride the camel. You petted it." "Anyway, it's their last camel. Was it too small to ride? Shall we go back? You want to give it a try?" Rafik considered it. He turned and waved, looking wistful. Leanna said, "Remember, camels can spit." That's a true statement. Poppy sighed, "And we might have to leave you." The Dead Sea water was so prickly with salt, it stung Leanna's eyes. Her skin felt marinated after 10 minutes. "It's 7 times saltier than the ocean," Poppy called out. He strolled back and forth by the water, wearing a white baseball cap pulled low over his thick hair. He hated swimming. How do you feel at the lowest spot on earth? Down deep. Bottomed out. They were practically sitting on top of the water, as if invisible lounge chairs buoyed, goodness gracious, them up. Rafik called out. Strange. He was paddling fast like a duck. Calied laughed harder than Leanna had ever seen him laugh. "Did you like the Bodines?" she asked. He said, "Very much." "Did I ever tell you my Sidi grandfather was half Bodine? Once, when I was small, he took me to visit, like today." "Where is he now?" "He is dead. He and my city, too. When our village was taken away, I saw it." "Saw what?" "The Israeli soldiers exploded a house. You know, like they do when they think you are bad. And the house fell on my grandparents. It was not their house." A single puffed cloud drifted past overhead. Far away, someone hooted and leaped into the sea. "And then what? Did your family fight back?" Leanna asked. Calied had never mentioned many personal things before. Calied said haltingly, "My family does not like to fight. My parents are very sad till now. They will never be finished with the sadness. I had a bad picture in my mind a long time. For myself, I never fight. Then my mind is sick and doesn't get well. Sadness is better." Leanna said, "I think I would fight. Not kill, but yell or something." In the car going home, Leanna would tell Poppy what Calied had told her, and Poppy asked him more questions in Arabic. For now, the thick gray water seared a scrape on Leanna's knee. She said, Calied, nothing about this sea feels dead to me." Our next chapter, all about our roots go deep down even if they are tangled. And the quote for this one is, "She wanted another kiss. Her chapped lips were burning up." Ooh, okay. In March, Poppy found 3 American evangelists lost in the old city and brought them home for dinner. Leanna thought, if I were his wife, I would say thanks a lot and not mean it. But her mother was in the kitchen humming happily and cluttering pot lids as the visitors sat around the table, toasting each other with glasses of mint tea and gobbling roast chickpeas. "Hey!" We just ate those today. Rafik showed them the new designs he had been sketching for Star Trek phasers. He could tune in to planets X, Y, and Z. The 2 evangelist men, Reverend Crump and Reverend Holman, wore bright red and navy diagonally striped ties, and the women, Reverend Walker, and the woman, there's one, wore a long gray dress with a lace collar. Leanna asked the woman cautiously, "Are you married to," and nodded at the men, curious if one was her mate, and she used her own name, but the woman declared, "Honey, I'm married to the Lord's good will." Poppy said they had been wandering with the dazed looks by the shoe shops where the streets got narrower when he stopped to offer directions. our countrymen, but they didn't remind Leanna of anyone else she'd ever met in her life. Reverend Walker said, God told us to visit Mount Gilboa right now to set the blessed Gilboa iris that only blooms to see the blessed Gilboa iris that only blooms 3 weeks a year. So we packed our bags in Atlanta and bought tickets. Amen. Now they were waiting for further instructions from God because they hadn't received a complete itinerary. What were they supposed to do after they had visited the flowers and the Church of the Nativity and the other holy spots lined up like pearly buttons across the stony ground? Poppy offered his advice. I know a hospital that could really use some volunteers right now. It's in Gaza, and all the orderlies have been quitting, and the nurses are in an uproar, and nothing is getting done. Just a day or two of help would be a godsend. The evangelists looked at one another. Reverend Holman said, Praise the Lord! After Mom served the lentil soup and the coleslaw, which reminded them of home, and the stuffed grape leaves and the hot bread, but every one of them was quiet when Poppy mentioned the hospital. Reverend Crump told Poppy he wished they could say a prayer in Hebrew for him. Poppy mentioned that he didn't know any prayers in Hebrew himself, but Leanna didn't think they got it. When Poppy went to the kitchen to get a fresh pitcher of tea, she leaned forward and said gently, We're not Jewish, you know. The Reverend Walker asked Leanna if she'd been bathed in the blood of Jesus, and she could see Rafiq's eyes open wider. Luckily, her tongue got stuck, and her mother replied, don't think quite in those terms. So everyone had some nut cookies and hot tea. Rafiq said out of the blue, Do you know what our grandmother has in her collection? She has an empty tea gas canister that the Israeli soldiers threw at her house one day. It says, Made in Pennsylvania on the side of it. The soldiers get their weapons and their money from the United States. The guests' eyes grew wide. They didn't know what to say. Then Rafiq buttered his last pocket of bread. Reverend Holman said to their mother, as if Rafiq and Leanna weren't present, Your children must feel alienated here, don't they? Mom said, puffing proudly, I think they're doing quite well. Oops, almost lost my place. Rafiq added, sighing in a melodramatic way, but we do miss the school milk in little red cartons, which made his mother put her thumb and first finger together like an alligator closing its mouth. After dinner, the visitors went out on the front balcony to meditate on the hospital idea. Rafiq and Leanna wrinkled their noses at each other and escaped into Rafiq's room, where he put on his cassette tape of Japanese bamboo flute music. Leanna stared out the window where the heavens blazed like an orange bonfire and wrote in her notebook, The hills are dark with the shadows of night, but up in the sky is a brilliant light, a fire, fire, fire in the sky. That day, her geography teacher had said Arabs and Jews should trade places for a while and see what it felt like to be each other. But Adam said it would be too hard to do. She wondered, could she even imagine exactly what it would feel like to be her own brother? Poppy's voice called them back to the living room. We miss you in here. Reverend Crump asked for a last glass of water so he could take his anti-panic pill, and Leanna stifled a laugh, pretending it was a cough. Poppy asked if the meal had upset him, and he said, Night brings on brooding melancholy. Whoops. I think I skipped a page. Oh, no, oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Lost my spot for a second. When Reverend Walker laid her hand on his back and said something that sounded as if she were speaking in tongues, Hiya holla walla hala kalamoon, Rafiq's eyes widened with interest. Reverend Holman announced they decided to travel on into Jordan because they really wanted to see the famous carved city of Petra, so they'd better not take on any volunteer duties at that poor hospital in Gaza, after all. But Lord have mercy, they'd keep it in their prayers. Later, after he'd driven them back to their hotel, Poppy was muttering, Holy, holy, holy. And our next chapter is called Habibi. Wonder where that one came from. Darling, a dearly loved person, a favorite, a charmer, is the quote that the author put at the top of this chapter. For years the word floated in the air around their heads. Yellow pollen, wispy secret dusts of the ages passed on and on. Habibi, darling, or Habiti, feminine for my darling. Poppies said it before bedtime, or if they fell off their bikes, as a soothing syrup to make them feel sweetened again. He said it as good morning or tucked in between sentences. He said it when they left for school. Whatever else happened, Leanna and Rafiq were his darlings all day, and they knew it. Even when he stayed at the hospital past their bedtimes, they could feel his darling drifting comfortably around them. Their mother called them precious, her own English version of the word. She fed them, folded their clothes, even when they could have done it themselves, and squeezed fresh orange juice instead of opening frozen cans. At Leanna's house, they had fresh apple salad with dates, baked yams, delicious stir-fried cabbage. They had a father who wrapped their mother in his arms. They had Habibi, be careful, Habiti, I love you, trailing them like a long silken scarf. Leanna knew it didn't happen for everybody. In Jerusalem, they were living in the land of Habibi. City rolled it off her tongue toward them, and it balanced in the air like a bubble. They hovered inside the wide interest of these people they barely knew. Their giant family offered them glasses of cool lemonade with sprigs of mint stuck in the straws. They handed them bowls of pastel Jordan almonds and the softest cushions to sit on. In return, Leanna's family gave them oddities to think about. Leanna played the violin for them and told them, through Poppy, she would be in a symphony in Europe someday. They didn't know what a symphony was. Leanna wore blue jeans with paisley patches on the knees, and her aunts pointed and whispered. Poppy scolded her. They think you're destitute if you dress like that. Leanna said, so? She repeated the word inside her mind, destitute, destitute. She started to like it. Leanna smashed a potato in a bowl, mixed it with butter and salt till it was creamy, and offered it to City. Mashed potato, she said, as City carefully tasted it and smiled. City took the whole bowl from her hands, gobbled it down. She even tried to shape the words, mash potatoes. It was the first English she'd ever tried to say. Leanna's whole family seemed to be joining things. Poppy had joined a human rights group to focus on treatment and services for old people. Rafiq had joined an ecology club at his school. They would work with garbage and recycling. Their mother belonged to a women's communication club, women of different backgrounds writing letters to editors and sharing optimistic ideas. She would probably be elected president soon. After their first meeting, the Jerusalem Post wrote an editorial saying if other people followed their example, the peace process might zoom ahead. And Leanna? She belonged to nothing. But Watchers Anonymous, she walked the streets of Old Jerusalem, muttering her new words in Arabic. sprinkling them down like cracks between stones. Ana tayyib, I'm fine. We alaikum assalam, and upon you peace. Shuway, a little bit. Watermelon was babla. It wasn't any harder to say Ana Atif, I'm sorry, than it was to say other things. But people acted like it was. Two taxi drivers honked and honked at a jammed intersection, refusing to budge. A boy threw a hard ball at a geranium pot on Iman Janan's front step, and it shattered. Leanna was no better. One day in Arabic class, she grew so irritated with the dull text, she ripped a whole page out of her book. The teacher ordered her to stand in the hall and wrote a mean letter to her father in Arabic. And Poppy said, "Habibi, please." Leanna took a walk by herself down by the refugee camp, standing for a long time in the pinkish light, soaking up the quiet motions of evening. Women unpinned skirts and undershirts from lines. Where were Nadine and Caliad tonight? She always felt better when she talked to them. Boys polished crooked bicycles with rags. What pumped up their hopes? Poppy, do you think there will ever be a time when all people get along just fine? She asked when she got home. He was making hospital charts at the table. Nope. What would Leanna do if she could? She touched Omer's shoulder lightly. She'd touch Omer's shoulder lightly and leave a little Habibi dust there. She'd place one secret red poppy alongside Siddy's pillow and disappear into the cool night air. Whew, that was a long one, but we got through it.